to Pan Dulce with the President here at Woodland Community College. I am honored to kick off this incredible show where we'll have inspiring stories. My name is Lizette Navarette. I am so excited to kick off these conversations with community leaders, with our partners, and friends throughout all of Woodland Community College's service area. The show is called Pan Dulce with the President. Why Pan Dulce? Pan Dulce, also known as sweetbread, often paired with cafecito or coffee, holds significant cultural and social importance within the Latino communities. It represents the opportunity to come together to share stories, traditions, and aspirations. Growing up, I remember fondly having Pan Dulce with my grandma as I shared my hopes and dreams for the future. And so today's guest is truly an honor to have on Pan Dulce with the President. She is an incredible leader, helping lead the future of education, create opportunities, and a great partner with the college. And I'm pleased to welcome Elodia Ortega-Lampkin. Welcome.
Thank
Pan
you.
Dulce with the President. Thank you for being our first guest.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I'm very honored that I'm the first guest today.
Yeah. So, you know, within our families that, you know, we would sit around a coffee table and have a little pan, have a little cafecito, and, you know, a little bit of chisme, but just a lot of heart went into these conversations. And that's really what we're doing here today. I wanted you as my first guest because when I first arrived here at Woodland Community College, you were so welcoming and you said, whatever you need, we're in this together. Our families, our students need us. And that stayed with me. And I said, you know what? We have to have this conversation, share a little pan dulce from Casa del Pan here in Woodland, and you know, have a conversation and get to know each other a little bit more. So I had a couple of questions for you. One of them is related to family, and who in your family really inspired your worldview and your perspective, but more importantly, your leadership style?
Well, that's a very easy one for me. My dad has always been my biggest inspiration. My parents came here as to the Bracero program. So my dad was just an example of hard work, having a vision and a dream. And his dream was not to necessarily stay in the United States. His dream was to come and work hard and then go back to have his own little ranchito, right? So he came and we ended up living here for many, many years. But by the time he was able to collect enough money to go buy his little piece of property, you know, he made that dream come true. And he would always sit down with cafe when we were having cafe at the table, and he would talk to me, mija, and I was the oldest one, so I was the one that would pay more attention. And he would tell me, mira, aquí vamos a dibujar. You know, he started drawing where the cattle was going to be, where he was going to have the crops, and where we were going to build our little casita. And I would tell him, what about if we have a little trail of little trees coming into the little ranchito? And what are we going to call the ranchito? Yeah. And there was El Potrero. That was going to be El Potrero. And so I grew up always with my dad, his dream of having this little piece of land and calling it El Potrero. And my dad made that dream come true. Wow. You know, he just stuck to it through lots of challenges. And we grew up poor, but, you know, he saved and was committed to that vision, and he made it come true. And one thing I also learned from my dad is, you know, the value of hard work. And the reason I'm very connected to Woodland is because we are an agriculture community. And so that really it's always drawn to me because my dad also worked in the fields. I worked along with him on the summers. And so I appreciated the hard labor of the farm workers, you know, to work in the fields, and the products that we have and I see in the grocery stores, that I know that somebody picked them for us, right? And the hard work that came from that. But I also had the perspective of being a farm owner or having a little ranchito. And my dad would always worry about the weather, you know, and he would, you know, talk about what kind of seeds he was going to use. He would be worried about if it was going to be a bad year, you know, what that was going to mean financially for him, but not just for him, about his workers. You know, that was going to, you know, he had a few workers in Mexico that worked for him. It was not very big, but he would worry. He said, he'd always say, si no me va bien a mí, le va a ir peor a ellos porque tienen menos. So he'd always worry about that. So I think about that with our farmers here, right? And here in Woodland, about how many of our families are farm workers, and that they work for many of our farmers here. And there's a lot of pride as well.
Yes.
When you have a good year and you have a good product. And so I think, again, my dad having that vision, that hard work, having the understanding and compassion for others, people that work for you, that you work with together, and then being proud of the work that you accomplished.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can go on and on about my dad,
story.
I've always been drawn to work in agriculture areas because I feel my values, and I understand it, not only from working in the fields, but the whole part of producing. And also now, I'm very blessed that I'm middle class, right? And I can afford to enjoy a glass of wine, but there's a lot behind the glass of wine when I drink a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Right? I think about who harvested the grapes and the whole thing, to who actually developed the label and all those pieces. So so my dad has been my inspiration and has been a huge part of who I am now as a leader.
I love that. What I love about that story is that you didn't dismiss his dream. Like, you knew that he had that drive, and you helped. You provided him support in that dream, and I see that in your posts, that you see the dreams of families and students, and you don't dismiss them. You're helping them make them come a reality, like you did for your dad. So I love that. So who in your family then helped you or inspired you to go into education and educational leadership?
Well, my family did not necessarily see me as, or neither did I. I never thought about going into education. Because we came from very humble background, and my dad only went to school up to 3rd grade. So his vision, his dream was to go back to Mexico and have his little ranchito. And he just wanted us to have a better life, whatever that meant, right? For him, that meant not working in the fields and not struggling. So it wasn't that he didn't have high expectations for me, it's that he didn't know anything else. Yeah. He knew how to work the land. That's what he knew. And he knew that he didn't want us in the field. So he wanted something better for us. So I remember going to, with my dad to the grocery store, and he would tell me, mija, he goes, one day you can be a cash register. She's not, look at her, she's not working in the fields. Look at her pretty hands and her pretty nails, Or we'd go to the bank, and he would tell me, maybe you can be a bank teller. It's air conditioned, and look how important she looks, So he didn't know. And so it was through chance, through the migrant education, because I'm a product of migrant education. And so through migrant education, I had people around me that saw potential, and they just kept insisting on taking me places, like visiting colleges, and I would go to these college visits, and I'd see these people walking around in backpacks, and I'm like, wow, they look so smart, So I also, and it was through migrant education and seeing people that looked like me, that I thought, wow, that's a teacher, they're a bilingual teacher, or that's so that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you here, because representation matters. To have a Latina president of the college in Woodland, that is so inspirational for so many. You don't have no idea how many other people are looking up to you, and you're inspiring, right? It's like I was inspired when I saw others. So it was through the California migrant education, the California Mini Corps program. Counselors are so important. Pushing those students that don't seem like they're being goofy and they don't know what they don't know. But I was kind of exposed to things. Yeah. And then I started working as a para-educator by chance, because that was the way I got working out of the field that summer. So I was working in the field, working as a para-educator through the migrant education summer school program. Well, I chose the summer school program. And then I fell in love working with kids, just to see them grow and see how they looked at me, and how I was making a difference, And then one thing led after another, and so I just fell in love with education, because I felt that was something where I was making a difference for others.
I love that story. That also you had folks along the way, but and your dad was an important thread to that as
Yeah.
well. But and the importance of being intentional in the programs that we provide, and giving opportunities to all students.
Yes.
Yeah. Particularly students that have often been dismissed.
Yeah, and I think the whole work with making sure the families know how to access financial aid. That's one thing my dad didn't know when I got accepted to the university, and he was surprised and shocked, and I told him I'm going to be receiving refund money.
Yeah.
And so he was like, wow, and I said, I think I can help you too at the house, I could give you some of my financial aid to help pay the groceries.
Yeah.
But he didn't know.
Yeah.
And so many of our families still don't know. There's still a lot of work to do with that.
Yes, I agree.
Making sure that people know that it is accessible.
Yeah, and that is an area where we can partner. There's a lot of work to do. Affordability is a big issue in accessing financial aid. With community colleges, most of our families can attend tuition free, and we have programs that will even give students resources if they go full time. We have the Student Success and Completion Grant, $4,000 if you go full time for the semester, and another $4,000 if you go full time the next semester. And that's where we can partner.
Yes, we can make a big difference. So we're examples of that.
Yeah. So what are your hopes to accomplish in your tenure as superintendent?
I have so many things I want to do. But I think the most important thing is I want our students to feel that they can be anything they want to be. And if I ever go back, there's always going to be somebody that's going to want to help me because they care. And that we inspire them to continue to do something for someone else, whatever field that they choose to be in, to continue to make a difference in this world, right? Because that's what it's about. We all want to feel like we're valued and that we have something to contribute. What worries me is when we have students that graduate and have no idea what they want to do, or they don't feel like they have something to offer. Those are the students that we fail.
Yeah.
Right? If they feel like they haven't realized who they are as a person, to understand their history, their background, to understand what their strengths are, to understand what potential they have. None of us are perfect. We have to work on things, but we all have potential, and to have that confidence to work on that potential. And if we can have students leave us feeling confident, feeling valued, feeling cared for, they can be anything they want to be.
I love that.
Yeah.
Those are great goals for your tenure as superintendent. I'm very excited. I'm excited for what we'll do when we partner. Well, in that case, let's have some Pan Dulce now and enjoy. And thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining me here today and being my first guest. I also appreciated the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more. So let's pick out our bun.
Okay.
All right. Like cochitos, you like?
I think I'll have this one. This one's looking at me.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful time.